Good morning, everyone. Good morning and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Danbury. My name is Sam McCoy. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I am happy to be able to greet you this morning. I've been a member here for a little over 20 years. I've served in various roles on our family ministry team, on the board of trustees, and most recently with our Sunday services team. Now, as we start our service, this is a great time to silence your phones or other electronic devices if you have not already done so, and we thank you for that. I'm so glad that you are able to join us this morning because you, every individual one of you, is an essential part of our worship today. Whether today is your first Sunday with us or you've been here many, many times, in person or online, we are stronger because you are with us. As we gather this morning, we also respectfully acknowledge that our physical building is on the traditional land of the Paugussett people. This morning, our presenter is the Reverend Michael Tino. I encourage you to read his information in our order of service, but he's currently working on the lead team for the Church of the Larger Fellowship. And if you're not sure what the Church of the Larger Fellowship is, you should check that out and learn more about it. But it is the UUA's online and direct mail ministry. They do so much good work. He's also previously served on the UUA Board of Directors and is currently on the Ministerial Fellowship Committee. So we're so happy to have Reverend Michael here with us this morning. Next week, I'll point out, we have another speaker coming in who's connected to the UU congregation in Meriden. His name is Chris Bolster, and he's also an English professor at the University of Connecticut. So you should read about him and consider coming to that service as well. Before we get formally started this morning, I encourage you to greet your neighbors, either here in the fellowship hall or if you're online and want to greet in the chat. Say hello, introduce yourself, wave across the room. Thank you, Sterling, for ringing the chimes. So we do have a few announcements to highlight this morning, and one of them is from Maisie. So I'm going to invite Maisie to come up.
It's time for the mitten tree. Today, during the service, we kids are going to set up a little Christmas tree in the foyer. On the tree, you will find paper mittens with gift requests on them for families in the Interfaith AIDS Ministry. The Interfaith AIDS Ministry helps people whose families are affected by the illnesses HIV and AIDS. Some gifts are big enough that few people might want to go in on them together. If you are able, during coffee hour today, please take a mitten from the mitten tree. Write your name on the other mitten in the pair and leave the second mitten on the tree so we know who has which mitten. On Sunday, December 8th, please bring in your wrapped gift and the mitten you took. Thanks for giving.
All right. Thank you, Maisie. Great job. And there are a few other announcements in the order of service that you can read with events coming up this week and beyond. I'll also remind you, though, that we, in recent weeks and months, have been restarting our weekly food donations. So we encourage you to bring some non-perishable food for our food collection each week. And with that, I think it's time for the chalice lighting affirmation. And so Nell is going to come up and light the chalice for us. And while she does that, I invite you to join us in the words for our chalice lighting, which are in your order of service and on the screen. Love is the spirit of this congregation, and justice is its light. This is our covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek and speak the truth in love, to help one another, and celebrate life. And with that, we'll sing our hymn of welcome, which is number 95. There is more love somewhere. Feel free to rise in body and or spirit.
It's so good to be together. Let's say our children's affirmation. The words are on the screen. We are Unitarian Universalists. We are people with open minds, loving hearts, and helping hands. We care for the earth and each other. And I'm going to invite my friend and colleague, Michael, to tell the story with me this morning.
So I'm going to invite you to think about the worst thing that you have ever done. And I don't want to know what it is. I don't want to know. But, maybe you didn't tell the truth, or maybe you hurt someone, or maybe you took something that wasn't yours. Whatever the worst thing that you have ever done was, again, I don't want to know. And I want you to think about that thing and what it would feel like if everywhere you went, you were the person who did that thing. My grandmother was a really wonderful person and tried really hard to not do bad things. And so the worst thing in her entire life that she ever did was she stole a towel from a Holiday Inn on vacation at some point in the early 1960s. And I know that she did this because growing up in my house, there was a Holiday Inn towel in our closet. And naturally, I asked where it came from. And my grandmother admitted that she had taken it from the Holiday Inn. So I use this story because it's not the worst thing that could be done, but she did it. And, there are ways that you can, say sorry for the things that you did. What are things that she might have done to say sorry for taking that towel? She could have sent the towel back to the Holiday Inn. She could have taken the towel back to the Holiday Inn. She could have called up the Holiday Inn and offered to send them money to pay for the towel, right? She could have just said to the Holiday Inn, I'm sorry I took your towel. What would you like me to do? Right? There are lots of different ways that we can make up for the things that we do. The Holiday Inn might have said, you know what? Lots of people take our towels. Don't worry about it. Enjoy it. Put it in your house. Proudly advertise that you stayed at a Holiday Inn for the next 50 years in your house. I'm sure that that towel is still in my mother's linen closet. But she didn't do any of those things. She folded up the towel and she put it in her closet. And I try to imagine what it would have been like if everywhere my grandmother, this wonderful, wonderful person, went. She would care for people. She would do good things in the community. If everywhere she went, people went, "That's the towel lady." Right? If every time she applied for a job and she did work outside the home because she had to put on her job application, "I stole a towel from a Holiday Inn in 1961." Right? So I want you to imagine what that would feel like. How do you think that would feel if everywhere you went, every job application you put down, every time you filled out a form for school, you had to put the worst thing that you've ever done in your life at the bottom of the job application?
I see Maisie's look on her face.
How would it feel? Again, don't tell me what that thing is. I don't want to know. How would it feel? Even if you apologized for it, it would feel shameful. Yeah, and shame is not a good feeling. It's not something that we want people to feel. We try really hard not to get people to feel shame. It's not a productive feeling, but it's what we feel. How else would it feel to you? Just think about that form. I'm applying to go to summer camp, and at the bottom of the summer camp application, I have to put the worst thing I've ever done in my life. Or fear. Fear that people would find out and judge you, treat you differently because of that. It would be a burden.
It would feel like that defined.
It would feel like that defined you. Yeah. And even if like you sent 50 cents to the Holiday Inn or said I was sorry to the Holiday Inn, they said, "No, don't worry about it, keep the towel," you still had to write it down every time. Regret?
I think after a while you'd start getting a little angry.
After a while, you'd start getting a little angry.
You have to carry this out.
Really? Do these people really still care about this towel? Right? Like, I've written down that I've stolen this towel for 50 years on applications. Can we let it go at some point? Well, I want you to think about,
Well, I had this thought, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe her conscience bothering her all those years, if it did, caused her to be this good person that she was. Maybe she just didn't motivate herself to be better.
yeah, so maybe like actually feeling bad for the things we do can motivate us to do something better. And what if she still had to write, "I stole a towel" at the bottom of every job application?
Even though she felt bad.
Even though she felt bad, even though she used that feeling bad to become a better person, right? Which maybe she did, right? And what if like people were like, "Well, I'm sorry, we don't hire towel thieves here at Linens and Things." We cannot hire a towel thief. It's too big a liability for us. Because that's what people hear so much of the time. And one of the things that I'm going to be talking about is when people actually do bad things or accused of those things and get that label for the rest of their life, what it feels like to them. So I want us to imagine that for ourselves, because after a while, I imagine they get a little angry, right? And they feel that shame, and they feel all of these things that you said, and they wonder, what do I have to do? What do I have to do to not be labeled by that anymore? How many good things make up for that bad thing? Right? I'm going to keep doing good things, but at what point does the number of good things outweigh that bad thing? So I want you to think about that today.
Ooh, I wonder if our faith calls us to something different than that. I'm going to invite Lana to come forward for the basket for food collection. And I'm going to invite, let's see, Maisie to come forward to light the lantern to bring our chalice light downstairs. And we're going to sing together This Little Light of Mine as the kids come downstairs. Hold up your food if you have got some.
Now is the time in our service for milestones. Part of us coming together each week here in the fellowship hall and online gives us a space to share what's in our hearts, what's weighing on us, what's lifting us up, what we want each other to know. So we begin that process with our silent milestones. If you'd like to come up and place a stone in the bowl, or if you're online, put an X in the chat to mark your silent milestone. We'll take a few moments to do that first.
Our reading today comes from the book on repentance and repair by Rabbi Danya Rutenberg. Published by our own Beacon Press, perhaps you've read this book. It was a UUA common read last year, and if you haven't, I highly commend it to you. Danya Rutenberg writes, when we think about repentance and accountability, we must also think about consequences. We must consider what the goals of these consequences are and what kinds of impacts they have, and whether or not those consequences are ultimately beneficial to the harmed party or parties. And we must consider whether they facilitate or hamper the ability of perpetrators to grapple with and ultimately to do repentance work on the harm that they have caused. In short, we must talk about criminal justice. At the time of this writing, the American criminal justice system holds 3 million people in state and federal prisons, local jails, juvenile detention centers, and other carceral facilities. Since 1970, the U.S. prison population has risen by 700%, far outpacing the growth of the general U.S. population or its crime rates. The United States incarcerates more people than any other nation in the world. Our country holds 25% of the world's prisoners, despite representing only about 5% of the world's population. Many people are currently behind bars for things that have been deemed criminal, but that are at their root an expression of other kinds of needs. As the racial justice activist and organizer Mariame Kaba puts it, all that is criminalized isn't harmful, and all harm isn't necessarily criminalized. For example, wage theft by employers isn't generally criminalized, but is definitely harmful. Much has been written about the devastation wreaked by mass incarceration and the injustice and abuse perpetrated through and by it, including but not limited to the psychological torture of solitary confinement, the prevalence of violence and sexual abuse in the prison system, the overcrowding and neglect, particularly acute during a deadly pandemic, the failure to adequately treat people who are mentally ill, and the lack of access to education and other programming. The system is not necessarily concerned with justice. When Adnan Khan was 18 years old, he agreed to take part in a robbery, to grab some marijuana and run as part of a fake drug deal, with the understanding that no weapons were to be used in the crime. But things didn't go according to this plan. The person assigned to be the getaway driver began punching the person they were trying to steal from. Turns out the driver was having a schizophrenic break, and then he used a knife to kill their target. Because Khan was involved in the robbery, he too was considered liable for the death of this man and was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. He became an activist, protesting unjust sentencing and co-founding an organization focused on that goal from inside San Quentin. He has since been released. As he put it, quote, "Holding someone accountable isn't built into our carceral system. The district attorney never wanted me to be accountable. He wanted a conviction." Two different things.
When you give your time and your energy to the work of this congregation, and when you donate to its financial support, you are giving gifts to each other. As each one of us gives and receives from our members and friends, we are then able to give to the community around us. We will, in a moment, receive our weekly offering, and there are multiple ways to give this morning. The offering plates will pass here in the fellowship hall. There is a QR code on the screen if you'd like to use that to give, and you are always welcome to mail a check to us here at 24 Clapberg Ridge Road in Danbury. We thank you for your generosity.
When I was introduced, Sam mentioned that I serve as one of the 3 co-lead ministers of the Church of the Larger Fellowship. We are your Unitarian Universalist congregation without geographical borders or walls. We exist all over our globe and serve Unitarian Universalists who, for whatever reason, do not find the local bricks and mortar congregations to them accessible places for them to worship. And so among our membership are now over 1,900 incarcerated Unitarian Universalists. And it is in accountability to those Unitarian Universalists, and I have to check that number every time I get up and preach about it because it is going up daily. It is out of accountability to them that I offer you the questions and the stories that I'm going to tell you today and ask you today. I'm sorry that I don't have more answers to the questions that I'm about to ask, and I trust that you can hold them and think about them and think about what our faith has to say about them. Why does United States society love punishment so much? Why in election after election does the window of what is possible with regard to our criminal justice system shift steadily to the right? Why do we fall again and again for politicians who promise us policies that are, quote, hard on crime, even though we understand that to mean inhuman to people who have been labeled criminals? Why do we seek to satisfy our basest instincts for revenge instead of nurturing the better angels of human nature? You know, all of these kinds of laws, mandatory minimum sentence laws, 3 strikes and you're out laws, all of the laws that have been enacted that have led to that 700% increase in incarceration in this country without an increase in crime rates. Cutting budgets for prison systems to the point where they can't offer adequate nutrition to incarcerated people anymore. And even enslavement. Yes, literal enslavement. For those of you who are not aware, the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution that outlawed slavery has an exception in it. The United States Constitution allows slavery as punishment for a crime. And so people in our prison system often work for pennies an hour. They are forced into labor, often for private industries that pay large amounts of money to the states to get that free or cheap labor. And our states have frankly become addicted to the money they make off of prison labor. And yet our people can't seem to get past that and overturn it. Voters in California just a few weeks ago rejected a proposition before them to eliminate slavery in the state of California. That proposition was to eliminate enslavement in California state prisons because that's the only place where it's currently practiced and legal. And in one of the most liberal states in the United States, voters rejected that proposition. Why have we as a society so thoroughly abandoned accountability in relationship? I understand that Reverend Tony has introduced the concept of restorative justice to you. Restorative justice makes room for repentance and repair that are based in relationship, based in bringing people together, based in making amends for the bad things that we have done and seeking to be better people. But our system, our society's system is not based on that. It's based on retributive justice, a particularly harsh form of it as well. A harsh form of retribution and punishment that does not make room for relationships, that does not make room for repair, that labels people for life with the label of the worst thing that they have ever done, or often the worst thing that they have ever been accused of doing. I want to tell you some stories. Stories of people I know, or friends and family members of people I know, some of whom are among the incarcerated Unitarian Universalist members of the congregation I serve. I've changed the names of most of the folks I'm talking about, but the details are true. After each story, I will ask you some questions and pause for a moment because I want you to think about them deeply. I will not offer you answers to these questions in the great Unitarian Universalist tradition. Juanita Harris, whose name I have not changed because she has been public and open about her story, is a CLF member incarcerated in Texas. Juanita was a nurse before being sentenced to a 50-year prison sentence for killing her abusive partner in what she considered self-defense. The state disagreed. She has become a published activist for the rights of incarcerated people. One day, Juanita overheard her fellow prisoners talking about sex and abortion through the vents between the cells, and she realized as a nurse how little they knew about these topics. This is one of the things that makes me proud that she is a Unitarian Universalist incarcerated in Texas because we believe in comprehensive sexuality education, don't we? So she began providing sexuality education whispered through the vents between the cells in her unit. People would ask her questions and she would answer them. And she included in her comprehensive sexuality education what she called dispelling myths about abortion. Her educational talks were overheard by a correction officer who was vehemently anti-abortion. And Juanita was moved into solitary confinement to prevent her from educating people. To prevent her from educating people about sexuality in her prison. She was moved into solitary confinement and held there for 7 years. 7 years in which she had no contact with her children beyond a 5-minute phone call every 3 months, usually allowed in the middle of the night. And if it went to voicemail, it was another 3 months before they allowed her another one. She writes this. These are the words of Juanita Harris herself. The hardest part of solitary confinement isn't witnessing the deaths, suicide attempts, self-harm, and physical and sexual abuse. It isn't the triple-digit temperatures without air conditioning or freezing temperatures without heat. Neither is it the hunger pains masquerading as thunder, nor being stuck in a steel box for months without a shower or outside sunshine. I would gladly endure all of the above 10 times over than be denied the opportunity to console both of my daughters over the phone after their fathers died. It was bad enough that I couldn't offer them a hug. And so I ask you, beloved, how can we continue a system in which the punishment meted out is subject to the whims, prejudices, and politics of corrections officers? How do we think that isolation and separation from one's support systems, including one's family, often one's children, affects people? John fell in with a bad crowd as a teenager who convinced him to drive a getaway car for a robbery. A robbery that, as happens in so many crimes, wound up involving an assault. John just drove the car, but he was held responsible for all the crimes committed that night, including the felony assault. His defense attorney convinced him that since he was a first-time offender, he should plead guilty, thinking that he would get a light sentence, to throw himself on the mercy of the court and the judge. He might even, said the defense attorney, get time served. The judge saw a young black man appear before him, and not a first-time offender. The judge saw a criminal. And so John, first-time offender, getaway car driver, was sentenced to 9 years in prison and incarcerated hundreds of miles away from his family. When he was finally released, he tried to build a life again, and he found it impossible because of the trauma inflicted upon him in prison. Job after job was closed to him when he revealed at the end of his application, as he was legally mandated to do, that he had been convicted of felony assault, even though he had never directly hurt anyone. Jobs that were available to him came with constant surveillance and mistrust, which compounded the trauma that he lived with. He struggles to this day. He avoids people as much as he can. He is reticent to trust anyone who tries, like his defense attorney, he thought, to help him. Why do we tolerate prison conditions that are inhumane forms of torture and that leave people with lifelong trauma and scars instead of rehabilitation? Why do we hold incarceration against people after they have completed their sentences? After they have completed what the state has deemed adequate punishment for the crimes that they have been charged with? Grace pled no contest to a charge that she maintains she is innocent of, understanding that the district attorney up for re-election that year had amassed an inflammatory and prejudicial case of circumstantial evidence designed solely to make a jury lust for revenge. The district attorney had charged her with crimes that he was seeking the death penalty for. And so rather than take her chances with a vengeful jury and the death penalty, she pleaded no contest and agreed to spend 14 years incarcerated for a crime that she did not commit. And she did that. She endured all of the injustices of our prison system. She did what she could to survive in prison. She did what she could to make herself a better person for 14 years incarcerated. She served her entire sentence and was released. Months after her release, she was offered a job. And while the people who were hiring her knew about her conviction, they saw it on the bottom of that form and they said, okay, that's all right with us, which is a miracle in and of itself. Someone else found out later. They Googled her and found an article from the city that she had lived in 15 years before, in which she was sentenced, an article that reiterated all of the inflammatory case of the district attorney, and they filed a complaint, which set off a chain of overreactions from successive levels of higher-up administrators that ultimately led to her being placed against her will on leave from her job. The administrators asserted that they had no problem with hiring a formerly incarcerated person, but they had a problem with the fact that she had never expressed remorse for the crime. She is still not sure how to react to that demand. How do we expect people to express remorse for crimes that they did not commit? And at what point do we consider serving a lengthy prison sentence to be enough punishment? Robert is incarcerated in New York at the Green Haven Correctional Facility in Dutchess County, not too far from here. He is 20 years into a sentence of 22 years to life for a violent crime that he admits to and regrets with every fiber of his being. He is trying every day to use that regret to become a better person. And as part of his try for repentance, he has changed himself while he has been incarcerated, taking advantage of every rehabilitative program available to him, which are considerable in New York State prisons, as they probably are in Connecticut as well. He has earned a bachelor's degree and 2 master's degrees while he has been incarcerated, and he currently does peer-to-peer nonviolence education with the other people in his facility. Every day, he teaches people how to respond to things with nonviolence. Robert is preparing now for the possibility that in 2 years, at the 22-year mark, he might have the opportunity to appear before the New York State Parole Board. And he knows that his chances there are slim. You see, once upon a time, the 80s, 92% of people who saw the parole board in New York State were offered parole. 92% of people who came before that board expressed remorse and contrition for what they did, showed that they had become better people. They were released on parole. And then our society decided we needed to be tougher on crime, which again means that we needed to be more punitive, more harsh, less forgiving, and less inclined to allow people any chance to do something restorative. And so in the 1990s, that number went from 92% to 3%. 3% of people who came before the parole board in the state of New York in the 1990s were offered parole. Now, mind you, you can't go before the parole board until you have served the minimum number of years that the state deems adequate to punish you for what you did. Robert's sentence is 22 years to life. He can't go before that board until he serves 22 years of that sentence. 3%. It does not remain quite that low today, but less than a third of people, less than 33% of people who see the parole board today are offered a second chance in New York. Most commonly, the parole board's sole justification for denying parole, because they have to say why, and often the only reason why that they give is the seriousness of the original crime. Something that can never change. Something that will never change. Something that does not and cannot take into account what happened next, how someone has changed, how someone has made themselves better, how someone has tried to make restitution. Rehabilitation is not taken into account. Remorse is not taken into account. It does not matter how few tickets for behavior that someone is issued. Even people with 0 tickets over 20 years, which is astounding in our criminal justice system that finds the littlest opportunity to cite people for bad behavior. Even people with 0 tickets over 20 years are denied when they come before the parole board. Robert knows this. He knows what his chances are. He knows that what he did 20 years ago was terrible, and that it will probably be used as justification to deny him parole today. In 2 years, he will not be deterred in his repentance. He is sincere in his efforts to never again be the person he was when he committed that crime 20 years ago. And despite all the good that we know could come from having an elder in the community teaching young people about nonviolence, teaching young people about the consequences of making bad, really, really bad decisions, he will probably be denied parole in 2026. So I ask, what do restoration, repentance, and repair really mean in a retributive, punitive system? And what does someone need to do to prove that they have changed for the better, that they have made themselves a different person? These questions are deeply theological questions for me. My universalism teaches me that grace and forgiveness must always be available. My universalism rejects the notion that someone can or should be labeled forever according to the worst thing that they have ever done or the worst thing they have ever accused of been doing. My universalism rejects the notion that anything we could possibly do, no matter how horrible, strips us of our humanity and makes us eligible to be enslaved and punished and labeled for the rest of our lives. My universalism holds open the possibility of repentance and repair. It doesn't mean that it's automatic, right? People do horrible things, and in order to make repentance and repair, they actually have to do the work of repentance and repair. Tanya Rutenberg, in the book from which we have heard an excerpt, outlines the steps that 12th century Spanish Jewish doctor and Rabbi Maimonides said are necessary for truly repenting and repairing for one's misdeeds. They include naming and owning the harm that you've done. Like actually coming to terms with the harm that you did, if you did it. To engage in a process of changing yourself with no expectation, like Robert, with no expectation that other people are going to see it, with no expectation that anyone's going to give you a cookie for it. You have to engage in the process of becoming a better person, of learning how to do better, of changing yourself. The third step is making restitution and accepting the consequences. Often the restitution that we make is indirect. It is restitution to a society that we have harmed by the things we've done, but we have to allow people to do it. The fourth step, after all of those three have been completed, is that we have to apologize for what we did. And we're not allowed to apologize until we have become better people and made restitution for what we've done. And Maimonides' fifth step, as outlined by Rabbi Rutenberg, is making different choices in the future in our lives. And it is only by making those different choices that we prove that we have become better people and are worthy of being held in a new light. If the pain of incarceration is meant to be the restitution and the consequences, we must allow for the fact that people can actually change themselves enough to make different choices in the future. Our society does not even allow for that possibility right now. The work that I do, the ministry that I engage in with the incarcerated Unitarian Universalists I serve, insists that we as a faith recognize the humanity of everyone. And that includes everyone who has been incarcerated in our society, no matter what they have done. They have not given up their humanity. They have not given up their inherent worth and dignity. The work that I do insists that a better solution is possible, that it is possible. And if I had an answer for how we were going to do this, I'd give you the answer. But I have to believe that it is possible to shift the political window in our society back towards humanity and away from revenge and restitution and punishment. And so as you as a congregation consider this month the theme of repair, I want you also to consider repentance. I want you to consider that it is possible that even the worst transgressions must come with the possibility of change. Not an automatic thing, but the possibility, the invitation of turning ourselves toward relationships, of making ourselves accountable for what we have done, for the harm we have caused, even the very worst thing that we've done in our lives, of turning ourselves back towards goodness. And I want you to consider what it will take to build a society in which that is possible. I wish I knew, but together we can dream it into being. And if we can dream it into being, we can build it together, beloveds. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Michael. We're going to extinguish our chalice now, so please join me with the words on the screen and in your order of service. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth,
The warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts
and out into the world until we are together again. And now we will sing our closing hymn, Building a New Way. It will be on the screen with a video, so we invite you to rise in body and or spirit.
Our words of benediction come again from Rabbi Danya Rutenberg. We can never undo what we have done. We can never go back in time. We write history with our decisions and our actions, but we also write history with our responses to those actions. We can leave the pain and the damage in our wake unattended, or we can do the work of acknowledging and fixing, to whatever extent possible, the harm that we have caused. May we do that work together.